Hi and welcome to another episode of the podcast. My name is Vimoh, Vimoh, and that is also my Instagram and Twitter handle. This is my YouTube channel or my podcast if you're only listening to the audio version of it, and this is where I talk about something that has been on my mind for the last entire week. This week, I'm going to talk about free speech. It's not going to be a very long episode, but I think it's something that I have to get off my chest because it's a view that I have kind of raised on multiple occasions, but it would be nice to have it encapsulated in one video or episode so that I can share it with people whenever they ask me, "Oh, so you are in favor of stand up comedians having free speech, but what about the free speech of actors who say that India ko freedom bhik mein mili thi?" Or is a stand up comedian who goes out of the country and says that I come from two Indias, one where a lot of bad things happen and one which has elements of greatness in it, is that person not crossing the limits of free speech? Or does that person have free speech at all? And these are complicated waters and we all have to kind of navigate them. But I wanted to talk about free speech this week because a number of things that have to do with free speech have happened. A lot of things have happened, but this has also been something that has come to the fore, and in a very important way, because we have two primary characters who we can use as examples. There is also a third rate character who we'll get to later in the episode, but let's just start with two people. One is stand up comedian Veer Das, and the other is actor Kangana Ranaut. Here's what has happened. Kangana Ranaut has said that Bharat ko freedom bheek mein mili thi. And a lot of people are unhappy about this. A lot of people say that she should not have said this. A lot of people say that this is not something that is respectful to India, especially because this statement was also laden with a certain amount of political flavor, because she said that asli freedom 2014 mein mili thi when the BJP came to power and when Narendra Modi became prime minister. Then the other example is that stand-up comedian Veer Das went to America and at a venue in America recited a poem sort of that he had written about how he feels coming from India, which feels like two Indias. And a lot of people took offense to this because he threw some light on the things that make him not so proud of being an Indian. Here's the thing. Both of them have free speech. Both of them, in an ideal world, have free speech. But also, it needs to be pointed out that in an ideal world, I should not have to say that they have free speech. It's a given. The point is that free speech is not only two words that exist in a vacuum. Free speech by itself does not mean anything. We are all obsessed with the idea of free expression. We are all obsessed with the phrase free speech. Right-wingers try to shame left-wingers by saying, "Oh, where is our free speech then?" And left-wingers are obviously somewhat embattled right now because the right wing is in power and there is no dearth of attempts to prevent the left from having free speech. A lot of scholars and students are right now in prisons because they exercised their right to free speech. The situation is complex, although by no means is the situation a both sides situation. Power is very much on one side of this conversation, and powerlessness is very much on the other side of this conversation. In order to understand what free speech is, or what is the value of free speech, or if free speech applies in a certain situation, we need to keep some very basic things in mind. The first, obviously, is, as I pointed out, free speech is not something that exists in a vacuum. Free speech is a property of a free society. If your society is not free, if your society is not an equal society, then you can't have free speech, because not everyone has the same protections as everyone else. In a society where everyone can expect that if the free speech is violated, I can go to the police. Or if my free speech is violated, I can complain to the courts. That society has some amount of protections for free speech inherent in its structure. If we don't have that kind of a society, if hypothetically speaking, we lived in a society where some people can get away with saying anything, including asking for people to be murdered, and some people can not get away with even a speech that says we should all live in harmony, then that is not a free society. And in such a society, in such a surrounding, talking about free speech is meaningless. So when you're talking about Veerdas or Kangana, you need to keep in mind that they both occupy very different spaces in this unequal society of ours. Veerdas represents a side that is increasingly under attack because it speaks about the importance of equality, the importance of India living up to its highest potential as a secular society. There are some problems with Veerdas also, just as there are a lot of problems with the general feel of the liberal stand-up comedy space, because it tends to have blind spots as far as caste is concerned. And about that, Anurag minus Verma has written a great piece in the print. I would really encourage you to read it. I would even leave a link in the description, so you can just click on it and go there and read it. It has to do with how in all these lamentations about modern India having been lost in 2014, there is absolutely no mention of caste, and how liberals appear to be under the impression that India was a very, very, very different place before 2014. I personally think that the only thing that happened in 2014, these days, I have come to realize that the only thing that happened in 2014 was that the things that liberals often do not like to think about, caste being one of them, caste based discrimination being one of them, came to the front. Now we have to all look at the ugly side of what India is. Look at the ugly side of what India has been for a long time. It's just that we didn't have to face it because we were not the ones under attack, because we were not the ones who were suffering the risk of imprisonment or attack or abuse online, because we simply said that, there are some things that are not quite perfect with our India. But leaving that aside for the moment, because this is not the topic of the video, the positions that Veerdas occupies and the position that Kangana occupies in Indian society are different. People who come from Kangana's background, and by background I mean background in terms of political loyalty, people from that background have greater protections. It is very evident, because from that background people have stood on stages and asked for people to be denied freedom, asked for people to be killed, asked for violence to be committed, and they have gotten away with it. So that side gets to have a lot of free speech, gets to have a tremendous amount of freedom in no matter what it says. The other side, about whom these things are said, also technically has free speech on paper, but the moment they open their mouths, their venues are attacked, their stand-up comedy routines are interrupted, they are put in prison, they are threatened with lawsuits, etc. My point is that in an atmosphere like this, it is foolish to talk about free speech. Free speech is a very good idea, but right now we do not have it. The next point I wanted to talk about was why we are obsessed with the words freedom of speech. We are a culture where we are told that we have a great oral tradition of passing on of knowledge. Teachers used to pass on knowledge to students. And a great part of this oral tradition was memorization. Memorization, as in your teacher tells you something and you memorize it. And because memorization was the primary technique using which knowledge was passed on and received, memorization is also these days an integral part of our education system, where the words themselves become primary and the ideas that those words represent become secondary, tertiary, or even completely unimportant. We are all looking at a hand that is pointing at the moon, and the person who's pointing at the moon is saying, "This is the moon." And we are all coming to the conclusion that the hand is the moon. We are not looking at what the hand is pointing at. It's an old proverb, and I'm just kind of sort of paraphrasing it in order to make a point. But the point remains that our obsession with words is kind of at the heart of our misunderstanding uh, that gives rise to this confusion about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is obviously there, but it's also not there because of the bigger picture being out of sync with reality. And now we come to that third class character that I spoke about at the beginning of this episode, which is a certain TV journalist whose name is Gullu. And he's referred to as Gullu by many people. And I saw him on television asking someone, is Abbajan a bad word? Well, technically, even Gullu is not a bad word. But you do feel bad about it, don't you, Gullu? When people call you Gullu? Why is that? Because words don't have meanings. Words don't have absolute meanings. You can use the choicest of abuses for your best friend, and your best friend will understand that you are coming from a place of love. And you can use the coziest, the most lovingest gullu bullu baby babu language for your sworn enemy, and your enemy will understand where you're coming from. Because your friend as well as your enemy understand that context matters. And that context is what gives rise to meaning. Abbajan is not a bad word and Gullu is not a bad word. But you have to keep in mind who is saying these words, why they're saying it, and with what intention is the word being said. Without that contextual reference point, without that amount of, who, what, and why, words actually don't have meanings. So that was my point about words, their meanings, and why the phrase freedom of speech is meaningless, because the context inside which freedom of speech exists has been compromised in modern India. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.